Good evening, everybody. It's 6:01 p.m. on October 27th, 2022. So the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. I'm Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the Planning Board. With me tonight is Vice Chair Amelia Aboff, Clerk Erin Gino, Jahan Habib, and Debbie Howard Easton. We have a number of items on our agenda tonight. But pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Act of 2022, this meeting of the Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation. A recording of these proceedings can be accessed at any time using the registration link at the top of the agenda. This meeting is being recorded. We do have a number of items on the agenda, one of which is 59 Bow Street, which has requested a continuance to the November 10th, 2022 meeting. Chair moves to continue 59 Bow Street to November 10th, seconded by Amelia. Chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Erin votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Okay, that agenda item is continued. We have three public hearings related to a similar situated site, 153 South Street. So I believe they have all been read into the record already and opened and continued. Is that right? I think we did that a couple of weeks ago.
So we have planner Andrew Graminsky with us. Andrew, can you confirm whether those cases were read into the record?
Yes, this is Andrew Graminsky, planner with Planning, Preservation, and Zoning. The applicant provided a continuance form, I believe, in September. I can't recall, though, if that was read into the record, but if you give me a sec, I can look that up for you.
That may have been the meeting where I read them in, but you know what? Out of an abundance of caution, let's make sure that they are read for the record. So, Erin, do you have those available to be able to read those three in?
I do. I have the agenda up with the three items, two at 153 South, and then the other at 2, 8, and 29 Harding Street.
Thank you.
Okay, so 153 South Street, PNZ 22-008. Boynton Yards Land Co. LLC proposes to develop a commercial shared street thoroughfare type in the high-rise zoning district, which requires site plan approval. Also 153 South Street, PNZ 22-108, Boynton Yards Land Co. LLC seeks approval of a plat plan, replating lots including 153 South, 0 Windsor Place, 33 Earl Street, and 2, 8, and 29 Harding Street, and establishing multiple new lots and right-of-way for Thoroughfare 1 and Harding Street, which requires subdivision plan approval. And finally, 2, 8, and 29 Harding Street, which is also known as 99 South Street, PNZ 22-007. Boynton Yards Land Co. LLC proposes to develop a 12-story LEED Platinum lab building in the high-rise zoning district, which requires site plan approval.
Great, thanks very much, Erin. We also have a number of items of other business, which are zoning amendment recommendations that the planning board joined the land use committee a few weeks ago in a joint hearing. And for the record, I was absent from that joint hearing, but I have since watched the video recording, and I have submitted my affidavit to make sure that I'm able to deliberate and vote on those recommendations to the council. And for the folks in the audience, the items on the other business is Mayor Valentine requesting an amendment to the ordinance to permit the adaptive reuse of commercial building types in the NR and UR zoning districts. Mayor Valentine requesting an amendment to the ordinance to permit additional uses for ground story commercial space on Pedestrian Street. We have a proposed amendment from Boynton Yards Land Co. LLC for a land conveyance position for portions of Earl Street. And we have one individual, Anthony Pasquale, requesting the adoption of an amendment to the ordinance map to change the zoning district of 34 Allen Street from NR to the SB overlay. Those were opened and public testimony was taken on those four proposed amendments. The planning board left a written comment open through noon on the 21st. It is my understanding that we have not received any written comment on those proposed agenda items. The record on those items is now closed, but out of consideration for Amelia, who is recused from several agenda items, it's the discretion of the chairman to take the agenda out of order and take up the recommendations for the zoning amendments first. And I will do them in an order that I think makes most sense for the fluidity of the meeting. I think Dan Botman is available to answer some questions from staff. Now, from the board.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, Dan, great, welcome. It's my understanding that for the two agenda items that are being put forward by the administration, that obviously the planning department is recommending that the planning board recommend approval of those agenda items.
Yes, we would.
Okay, because oftentimes for folks who are in the audience, the planning board regularly asks for the opinion of staff on whether the planning board ought to recommend certain zoning amendments to the land use committee. So we are always happy to have Dan and other members of staff come in and provide kind of the official position of staff and the guidance of our subject matter experts. So we also have two additional agenda items, which is the land conveyance and the rezoning of a parcel on Allen Street. Erin had requested an opinion from the law department on the conveyance portion. I don't know if the acting special counsel is present or not, but we did receive that opinion from the law department. I'm trying to find it in my folders here, but it was in support of the conveyance. I can't find the exact document now, but Emily, can you confirm that that opinion will be made available on the city website?
Yes, I will make sure that that is available.
Okay. And the last one is the parcel on Allen Street. So I'm wondering if, Dan, if we can take Allen Street first, because that's the only one that I don't think we've spoken to you or staff about specifically, and I've gotten an opinion. I know you've kind of rendered an opinion via email to me, but I think for the benefit of the board and for the public, if you could give the staff's thoughts on the proposed amendment for Allen Street.
Sure. The real thing is that the questions about Allen Street that were instigated with even a prior zoning petition that was put forward by Councilor Scott that has since expired is kind of like kicked off all of this research about the animal service uses. And the amendments that we put forward as the administration kind of negate the need for a zoning map change on this same property, because it more holistically handles how non-conforming pre-existing non-conforming commercial buildings in the NR and UR district are permitted to be used across the entire city. So instead of just looking at this one property, we looked at all of them across the board and asked ourselves, well, what might we think could be beneficial for completing neighborhoods in But this property was one of the ones that was specifically looked at. So while the property owner submitted this in the background, we were not speaking publicly about what our research was leading us to. So we didn't prevent them or advise them not to do this. So the outcome of both of these amendments would actually be the same, in that the veterinarian service would be permitted in this non-conforming pre-existing commercial building in the NR district. But we might, from the administration's perspective, we very much support the other two amendments, and feel like this is a better way to handle these properties than the single zoning district change that is requested by this one property owner. But it would effectively lead to the same outcome.
So I think what I'm hearing you say, Dan, is that if the administration hadn't put forward its own amendment that effectively does the same thing across the city, that you would likely be in favor of the result of this one particular amendment. But because we've got something that kind of governs the entire city instead of one parcel, that's what we're hoping to go for instead.
That is correct.
Okay, that makes me see things a lot clearer. Okay, does anybody on the board have any questions of staff on the agenda items before we take them up for individual discussion? Actually, you know what? For the purpose of Amelia's recusal from some, I'm just going to take them individually. So let's take the land swap first. Does anybody have any discussion on the amendment for the land swap for the thoroughfare and Boynton Yards? Any questions or comments or concerns about that? No. Okay. Seeing none, we do have a positive recommendation from the law department on this particular amendment. So what I'd like.
Mr. Chair, if you're planning to take a vote on this, should I be recusing myself at this stage?
Are you recused from the land swap?
I'm recused from the Boynton Yards items, yes.
All of them. Oh, you know what? Then let's take up Allen Street first.
My apologies.
That's okay. No, you're 100% right. So talking about Allen Street and the discussion that we just had with Dan, does anybody have any additional questions or comments regarding the proposed amendment for that one parcel on Allen Street? Yeah, Debbie.
I'm just curious procedurally how it works if the first proposed amendment that the administration put forward gets approved, which would then obviate the need for the second, which it seems that, preferable not to, recommend or go forward on the Allen Street one, particularly if the first one goes through. I'm just trying to understand how that
Makes a lot of sense.
how that goes in line.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's go with the two administration proposed amendments first, so we can move forward with a logical progression to Allen Street. So the first item on the agenda, I'm just coming back to it, sorry, it's on a different tab, is Mayor Valentine requesting ordainment of an amendment to the zoning ordinance, Article 3, residence districts, and Article 9, use provisions to permit the adaptive reuse of commercial building types in the NR and UR zoning districts. Does anybody have any comments or questions on that particular amendment? No. Okay. Seeing none, the chair moves that the planning board recommend adoption of that agenda item to the land use committee. Seconded by Amelia. Chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
John votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie
Yeah.
votes aye.
We have a unanimous recommendation for a positive adoption of that item. Next item on that agenda is Mayor Valentine requesting ordainment of an amendment to the zoning ordinance, Articles 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9 to permit additional uses for any ground story commercial space fronting a pedestrian street. Anybody have any comments or questions on that specific agenda item? Okay. Seeing none, the chair moves to recommend the planning board recommend adoption of that agenda item to the land use committee, seconded by Amelia. Chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
We have a unanimous vote to recommend that agenda item. Next, I'm going to take up 34 Allen Street, requesting the adoption of an amendment to the ordinance map to change the zoning district of 34 Allen Street from NR to the SB overlay. Based on the discussion we just had with Dan and kind of internally with the board, I think now, based on Debbie's guidance, it logically flows that our recommendation to adopt the administration's ordinance, which would kind of obviate the need for this one, would bring the planning board to make a recommendation to not adopt this one. But what I would like to do is in moving the planning board recommend that the land use committee and the council not adopt this, that we recognize and appreciate the landowner trying to do the right thing, but the fact that the city kind of got there first in a broader scope is the reason that the planning board is making its recommendation, because I think it is important to recognize the important work of people in the community doing what they think is best and what we would have probably gone with had the other amendment not come into play. Does anybody have any further comments or questions on that amendment? Yes, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I broadly agree. I was wondering if it's possible, or if the planning board has done this in the past, where if the city council were to move forward with not approving, for example, the adaptive reuse of the NR, if there could be like a conditional recommendation for this fourth item, because I think it makes a lot of sense to allow this kind of use. And as one planning board or as one member, I would be a little disappointed, like, should the city not should the council not approve sort of item 1, and then we make a recommendation against item 4, and then they're kind of stuck.
We haven't done that before, but I think it makes sense, and I think it ties into the sentiment that we wanted to put forward to the council. So I don't know if it's a conditional no, but I think it would be a recommended no, but recognizing that these certain things may change our recommendation if council didn't go that way. I don't think a conditional no is a vote we can take.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just I agree with Aaron's concern and would raise whether it might be appropriate for us to present a recommendation of no recommendation with describing the rationale that was just laid out, because I think it's probably easier to make that adjustment in a no recommendation environment than a no environment. Again, this is uncharted territory, just thinking.
I think either one are fine. I think what's important is that the planning board's recommendation to the council kind of reflect this discussion. So whether it's a recommendation of no or a recommendation of no recommendation, which I'm happy to do. I think that also makes sense. Does anybody have any? Yes, Aaron.
I guess with the sort of logic here, I might support Cherry Bob's idea of a no recommendation, just because it does give the council the leeway to be able to take the context into play.
Great. I'm on board with that as well. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, John.
Yes, so I'm also in broad agreement with respect to a no recommendation, because I certainly want to make sure that future activities of the city council do not negatively impact this particular individual and his properties. Therefore, the no recommendation makes sense with, of course, the reasoning behind it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Debbie, did you want to add anything? Are you good?
I think that makes sense. I agree with that approach.
Okay. In that case, I think it's really motion to make a recommendation to the council on this agenda item, while also incorporating the discussion that the board had, that staff can incorporate into its narrative that I'll review before we send off to make sure that it complies with the discussion that we all had. So Amelia's motion. I'm gonna believe that Erin was the second here because she was. And so the roll call vote will be the chair votes aye.
Amelia votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Erin votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Great. We have a unanimous vote for a no recommendation with a narrative, which is something that we pretty regularly do. So I think then those are all the agenda items that we have that don't relate to Boynton Yachts. So I know Amelia will need to step away in a recusal, so I'll let her do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I'll recuse myself from the remaining items on the agenda. Have a good evening.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay. The record reflect that Amelia has left the meeting. The last agenda item that we have in the other business is Boynton Yards Land Co. LLC requesting approval of a land conveyance petition for portions of Earl Street in the Boynton Yards neighborhood. And like I said, we do have a recommendation from the law department, which I think I just found, from Catherine Lester Salchet, acting special counsel, who has written a memorandum to Chair Ewan Campen of Land Use Committee and myself of the Planning Board dated October 20th, which will be put on the city's website for everyone to be able to see. And the law department recommends that the Land Use Committee and the Planning Board approve the petition for that conveyance with some reasons that are incorporated in that memorandum. So I don't know if anybody has any additional comments or questions of staff on this agenda item, or discussion that they'd like to raise by and between members of the board. Yes, Erin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just briefly comment that I appreciate the note from the law department. And this certainly helped me kind of think through, what this means, and also the fact that we might be expecting more of these as a mechanism to allow public benefiting improvements. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Anybody else? Okay. Seeing none, I move that the planning board recommend adoption of this agenda item to the land use committee. Seconded by Erin. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Erin votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
You have a unanimous vote to recommend this agenda item. So what I'd like to do now is move on to the items that are listed under the public hearings. So I don't know if it's going to be the same series of teams presenting, or if people want to break it up based on each individual application, but I think it kind of makes sense to take them all maybe at once, but I will leave it up to the applicant and their team to make their presentation. if we could have whoever wants to present on behalf of the applicant do a raised hand, and we can have staff unmute you.
Mr. Chair, I'm seeing an Ian Ramey with a raised hand, so I will be promoting him to a panelist. And I'm also seeing a John Fenton with a raised hand.
Yeah.
And a Kevin Griffin with a raised hand, so I will be promoting them to panelists as well.
And I also see one other gentleman, David Nagahiro.
Oh, yep, got it. All right. I am promoting Mr. Nagahiro to a panelist as well.
I think those are all the hands that I saw, but if the applicant team wants to identify other people that they want to be made into presenters, obviously, please do that.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. This is Rola Idris with the applicant. I think we just have one more individual, David Liberdoni, who will also be speaking.
Okay.
I see Mr. Liberdoni. I'm making him a panelist. And I'm sorry, who should I be making a presenter as well?
So Ian Ramey and David Nagahiro will be presenting, as well as Kevin Griffin.
If it makes sense, this is Kevin Griffin with Legend McCall Properties. We'd like to maybe start with the Boynton Yard subdivision approval. It's a more brief item, we think, and then jump into maybe Thoroughfare 1 and Building 3.
Sure. And just so everybody who's both presenting and in the audience knows, this is the first meeting that we'll have on this. The planning board's not going to be taking any action on these agenda items this evening outside of taking public testimony, hearing from the applicant team, and maybe having some questions of the applicant and of staff by the board. So if everybody thinks this is the only night that you'll be able to hear these things, that's not true. So sure, however you all see fit is the best way to do your presentation.
Apologies, just getting the shared screen ready here. Okay, can people see this? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Great, I will get started. So just the Boynton Yard subdivision plan, we're here to request subdivision approval for the remaining lots in the approved Boynton Yards master plan. And so just a quick aerial, and we'll certainly give more detail and project updates as we get into kind of the more project-based cases tonight with Thoroughfare 1 and Building 3. So I won't dwell too much on current status of the build out of the master plan, but I will just pull up this slide, which shows the amended master plan for Boynton Yards that was approved earlier this year. For context, which includes buildings 1, 2, and 3 right here. Building 4, the existing 561 Windsor Taza building. Building 5, a lab building, and Building 6, residential. Buildings 1, 2, and 3 are all lab buildings. And when we had the master plan special permit approved earlier this year, the amendment, this preliminary lotting plan was included with that permit, which sets up the development sites for the buildings, the roads and thoroughfares, and the future civic spaces and open spaces. So tonight we want to complete the subdivision process. We've had a few subdivision approvals over the past couple of years as Building 1, Building 2, Civic Space 1, and various aspects of the project have been underway. But we're here to complete the final steps, hopefully. So there are two plans we're requesting the planning board approval on. The first, shown here, is for the recorded land, and it includes Building 5 lot, Civic Space 3, Building 6A, part of Building 6B, part of the open space lot, Civic Space 2, and some thoroughfare lots. The second plan we're requesting approval for is on the registered land. So there's two separate plans, which we can explain in a moment. And this includes the remaining pieces to complete those other lots. So part of the Building 6B lot, part of the thoroughfare lot, the Building 3 lot here, a Civic Space lot, and a thoroughfare lot that would go to Harding Street. And so I have David Liberdoni on to explain the background, why there are two plans for the recorded and registered land.
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Excuse me, David. I'm just going to ask anybody who is going to be presenting or speaking on behalf of the applicant, if you could just introduce yourself and your affiliation, please, for the record.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. David Liberdoni from Nutter, McLennan and Fish, one of the project attorneys. Our intent here is to subdivide the remainder of the Boynton Yards master plan, but as a matter of title and having these plans ultimately recorded and filed with the Middlesex South Registry, we needed to create two plans. So one is covering the recorded land side of the registry, and that essentially deals with the northern portion of Boynton Yards, Thoroughfare 1. And then there's a registered land portion of the Middlesex South Registry that's governed by the land court. And that's essentially all those lots you see in green. The land court has its own subdivision approval process that the applicant has completed with the land court's survey division to make sure that, you know, all the meets and bounds of these parcels that we're creating are consistent with what was originally registered for this land several decades ago. So the only approval that the land court is now waiting on is the board's endorsement of this plan ultimately. And you know, if there's any further questions on that, I'm happy to answer.
And so one typo on that is that this would be updated to include a location for the board to sign on this plan. And so the two plans together, and sorry, this is Kevin Griffin from Legg McCall Properties, taking over the slides again. The two plans together shown here are what are being incorporated after the subdivision process into the master plan. And just the last piece that we wanted to note that in the staff report, it inadvertently did not address the new lots that were being created on the land court subdivision plan. And we wanted to clarify that tonight and for this submission, we're requesting planning board approval on both plans for all 15 new lots, which are listed here and more detailed on the subdivision plans themselves. And so this section of the staff report that describes the various details of each lot in the analysis should be updated to include just descriptions of the land court registered land plan as well, to make sure that we cover both of the plans that are submitted. And that's our presentation. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer.
And thank you very much. Usually subdivisions when they come before the planning board are not terribly controversial. But I do want to ask, I think, is Andrew still around? The planner on here, and I'm just wondering if we could get the opinion.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. Just wondering if we might be able to get your thoughts on this proposal, specifically as it relates to the distinction between the recorded and the registered land issue.
Yeah, of course. Staff apologize if that information wasn't totally fully fleshed out in the staff memo. At the time, we were under the assumption that the planning board would not need to approve the plan for the registered land, but we do appreciate Kevin bringing that to our attention that the board does need to endorse and approve the plan. I can't confirm from staff end that both plans to create lots that conform with the plan from the approved master plan special permit, or should I say the approved master plan that's authorized by the master plan special permit, and also the standards for lots that's required by the zoning ordinance. So no issues other than that the plan needs to reflect that the planning board needs to sign off, and that there's additional lots that together create the remaining lots for the master plan area.
Okay. Is there any impact on the legal notice that was sent out on how this application was noticed to the public? Do we need to renotice it? Do we need to have a technically a new application opened, or is it sufficient?
So, good question. Because we included 2, 8, and 29 Harding Street, which include the remaining lots for building 3 and then part of that lot for building 6A, I believe, it meets the notice requirements.
Okay, so outside of, from what I'm hearing, is a reworking of the plan to give the planning board the opportunity to sign. This is the presentation that we have, and the public will be able to provide.
Yep. So once the applicant provides a new subdivision plan for the registered land, we'll make sure we get that to you, and then we'll sort of move forward with the more formal process when you sign off on both plans.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I don't have any questions. I don't have any questions right now of the applicant or of staff, but I don't know if my fellow board members have any comments before we open up to testimony. Okay. Seeing none, I'd like to open up this public hearing to public testimony. For anybody that wants to speak in support of the application. Now, what we're doing right now is just talking about the subdivision application. The other two will be discussed in short order. So I'd like to make sure that anybody that wants to speak on this knows that it's to the application that was just presented to the board. And so if anybody wants to speak in support of the application, please exercise your raised hand now. Seeing none, I actually do see Councilor JT Scott is in the audience, and I don't know if Councilor Scott would like to make any comments on this application, or is just here in attendance, or would like to wait, but it's always the practice of the planning board to recognize our elected officials so they're able to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the courtesy. Good evening, honorable members of the planning board. These applications appear to be in order and, are following the plan that have been set out to fit our master plan for the Boynton Yards district. Honestly, I appreciate the diligence because the distinction between registered and recorded land sometimes escapes me. So I'm here mostly to listen to the board and any discussion that happens, but this piece seems completely in order to me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Scott. Seeing no other hands raised to speak in support of this application, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing and open up testimony for anybody that would like to speak in opposition of this application for subdivision or otherwise express concern. Please click your raised hand button and I will call on you. Okay. Going once. Going twice. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing. And the next meeting of the planning board, I believe, is November 10th. So
Mr.
And-
Chairman, if I may, for a moment. So we understand that there's a lot more detail to go over generally on Blaine Yards this evening with the other two applications. For this subdivision plan, we are actually hoping to have a vote from the planning board this evening. The update to the registered land subdivision plan to just change essentially the signature block to provide a signature block for all 5 board members, that can be easily taken care of when the board is ready to endorse the actual Mylar plan. You heard there was no public testimony in opposition and the counselors in support of this plan. The planning department is in support of this plan. This is all consistent with what the master plan has been laid out. The reason that we are asking for the board's vote tonight is that having these lots identified now and being able to record these plans and file them with the registry, this will enable us to do some year-end planning that we need to do on our end with our lenders, with our investors, to make sure that the Boynton Yards can fulfill all the plans and benefits that it's going to bring to this neighborhood, and those actions need to take place by year end. So by having the plans approved this evening, we'll be able to wait out the appeal period, have the plans recorded, and then be able to finish up some things we'll need to do on that transactional side by the end of the year.
I actually think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is a subdivision application, and we're not taking a vote on the kind of more substantive issues that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Do any of my fellow board members have any problem with taking the vote on the subdivision application this evening? Yes, Aaron.
I don't know if I have a problem per se, but through you, Mr. Chair, just maybe a question where just like to make super certain that if we were to hold this until our next scheduled meeting, that would prohibit prohibit the applicant from moving forward with sort of necessary year-end activities from a legal, finance, et cetera perspective. I just trying to make sure that this customary 2-week wait that we usually give for public testimony would be, dramatic enough to warrant, not giving that customary period.
If I may, Mr. Chair, this is Kevin Griffin with Leggett McCall Properties. The subdivision, just for context, our subdivision approvals for the past couple of years that include the lots for 101 South, Civic Space 1, and Building 2 have gone through, I believe, in one night as an administrative vote and without the 2 weeks. But I just wanted to add that for context. I believe that's how we've handled them in the past.
Okay, and just to confirm that, like, should we not give the 2 weeks, you guys would miss your end of year deadlines for all sorts of compliance reasons.
Correct. It would complicate some matters on our end for that David explained.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Aaron, do you have any problem with moving forward tonight on this application?
I don't, given the circumstances and the precedent that we have from approving these administrative agendas within 1 week, and then also as Councilor Scott has also given a positive recommendation, makes me a lot more comfortable.
Okay. Well, that being the case, having reviewed the application and the staff memorandum reflecting that it meets the required provisions of the Somerville zoning ordinance, I move to approve with the conditions laid out in the staff memorandum the application for subdivision plan approval for this application. Seconded by Aaron. The chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Congratulations, we have a unanimous vote for approval of the subdivision portion of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
How would you all like to move forward next?
Mr. Chair, this is Rola Idris with the applicant. I think we'd like to have the thoroughfare go next. So if Ian can be unmuted and become presenter. And then John Fenton would like to give an intro remark if possible.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the board. Can you guys hear me okay? Thank you. I'll just be brief. Just as a matter of context, we're here to get this thoroughfare approved and eventually dedicated to the city. It is an important connective piece of the puzzle. We are also going to be here later talking about the third building in a 5-building master plan that has been approved. And we're hopeful to be able to continue the construction of that, in light of the market conditions that are here in front of us, and that decision will be made sometime in the future. But, we're anxious to continue with this plan and to fulfill the goals of Summer Vision, as well as, the conditions of the master plan and our approval. And we thank you very much for your cooperation. We look forward to working, with all of you, and appreciate all your help through this process to this point.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome whoever else from the applicant would like to make the presentation on Thoroughfare 1.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Ian Ramey. I'm a landscape architect and principal with Copley Wolf Design Group. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Good to be with you this evening. As John had mentioned, we are going to run through Thoroughfare 1. We have a short presentation and look forward to our conversation at the end. So a quick look at our agenda. We'll go through some introduction slides to the project. We'll talk about the context, goals, walk you through our design process, including planting approach. We have some sections and experience slides to show. We'll talk about materiality, which is important for this project, and then discuss our next steps. So where we are in the site plan application process, we went through the master plan amendment process and got approval in winter of 2021. That kind of kicked off the individual building permit and community process, which started in the spring of this year. We tandemed Building 3 and Thoroughfare 1 as sort of two projects that went through together. We had our first neighborhood meeting in April. We had 2 UDC presentations in April and May, and then our second neighborhood meeting in June of this year. And then we assembled and submitted our SPA materials in July, and then here we are tonight before you. A broad look at the overall schedule. So here we are with the red line in the third quarter of this year. We're wrapping up our conceptual design and permitting, and with the conclusion of that, we'll then be entering into the green phase, which is the detailed design and engineering. We'll be having a lot of conversations, obviously, with the engineering department, as well as the mobility folks and PSUF. And then from there, we have a 3-phase construction, which we have some diagrams to show at the end of the presentation. But essentially what we're showing is that we're breaking the thoroughfare into 3 phase construction segments in order to be able to tie those to the buildings that are being brought online. A quick look at the regional map, so you know where the development is. The white boxes in the center of the screen is the massing of the development, and Thoroughfare 1 is highlighted with that yellow line, that yellow outline. It is the northernmost east-west corridor in the master plan development of Boynton Yards. And then spinning around on the aerial view, looking at it from the south, Thoroughfare 1 is highlighted in pink. It's sort of an L shape that wraps around the northern part of the site. You see it in context with 101 South, which is the constructed lab building. To the right of that is the proposed building site for 99 South. We'll be hearing about that later this evening. And then to the left of 101 South is Civic Space 1, which has already been approved and is currently in the permitting process with PSUF and other city departments. And then to the left of that is Building 2, 808 Windsor, also approved and currently under construction. So this project is unique in a few ways. The first way is that it's a privately constructed street, which will then be handed over to the city and become a public street. It's sort of unique in that regard. The second part that makes it unique is that, this is not your typical traditional street. It's really being designed as a pedestrian prioritized plaza space, essentially. Something that is we're really excited about and something that the city has approached the development team about embracing. And so with the aspirations that this project has, we know that there's a lot of guidelines that we need to follow, specifically the NACDO, or National Association of City Transportation Official Guidelines. There's a series of toolkits that we need to follow to make sure that the design of this streetscape is safe and operates in a way that is intended for the best benefit of everyone. So really what we want to be able to do is focus on pedestrian safety. We want to have the ability to maximize the tree canopy. We're seeing an opportunity here for this street to operate as a sponge, using green infrastructure to help to manage stormwater on site. We also see the street as a civic space, really as a linear plaza that has flexibility for everyday use. And has a lot of interaction with the active first floor uses of the buildings, as well as with the civic spaces. And then of course we need to design this with durability and maintainability in mind. So what will it look like? These are some precedent images that we've collected, some of which have been shared by the city to us. So in the upper left, you see the concept of a curbless or flush condition streetscape. You can see that the cars are not within a curbed condition. Basically, it's a plaza space that spans across the width of the thoroughfare, and the demarcation between the shared use zone where cars, pedestrians, and bikes mix is separated by a tactile strip, or by raised planters, or by bollards that sort of protect and signify the difference between the shared use zone and the pedestrian zone. In the upper right picture, you see an image that shows not just typical asphalt, but something that is more of a tactile sort of unit paver approach. This is something that makes it feel more pedestrian friendly and also serves to calm traffic. In the lower left, an image of a tree canopy, and really what we're trying to do on this project is to maximize our tree canopy to help mitigate against heat island effect and provide the necessary shade that we know is so desperately needed. And then in the lower right, the idea of the street having the ability to be shut down to vehicular traffic and being transformed or converted into an event space where you can see different types of festivities or other activities taking place. And then a diagram here that shows just sort of how the overall circulation of the master plan works. So there's a lot of forward-thinking mobility that's happening with the Boynton Yards development. Specifically, we have raised cycle tracks, which are shown in yellow. We have protected bike lanes, which are shown in light blue. We have Thoroughfare 1, which again is a pedestrian-focused street that's shown in the purple. The triangles that you see indicate the different points of access into the buildings. So the pink triangles are the lobbies where pedestrians enter into the buildings. The black triangles are the entrances into the parking garages below the buildings. And the white triangles are the loading docks where the buildings are serviced by the trucks. One other thing to point out here is that given the opportunity to shut down Thoroughfare 1, we understand that on the eastern and western portions of the site, we would put some type of a barrier down and give that space in purple over purely to pedestrians. And what's important to note here is if we were to do that, access into Building 5 and Building 6 are still maintained, because we have on the west side a shared service street access into Building 5 with the abutting parcel. And then on the eastern side to Building 6, we maintain access into that building via the eastern side of the building. Here's a diagram that shows how the thoroughfare sits within the overall master plan, so highlighted in orange. The thoroughfare itself is about 820 feet long. It's about 60 feet wide. It's a little over an acre. And you can see how it engages with the civic spaces and really with the amount of tree planting that you see here and the creation of subspaces that we're intending the thoroughfare to really function as a major component of the public realm. It's not just a streetscape. And so let me just dial into this here. So there's really three components that make up the thoroughfare. The central portion is the movement zone. That's where the cars, pedestrians, and bikes intermix. That's a 20-foot wide section that's in the middle of the thoroughfare. Next to that on either side is the hybrid or flex zone. That is a 7 to 8 foot wide zone that would have parallel parking spaces, but also opportunities for movable seating to be set up, for tent setup, for bike parking, really a flexible space that can be catered to the various uses, the programmed uses of the thoroughfare. And then beyond that, on either side of the flex zone would be the pedestrian zone, which would be the typical sidewalk as you would envision it. That would be a minimum of 6 feet wide, made of concrete, and actually widen out in some cases to the faces of the buildings. A diagram here shows how the thoroughfare reacts to the active first floor uses of the abutting buildings. So shown in blue and purple are either the lobbies, which are the blue, or the arts and creative or commercial retail spaces, restaurants, and so forth, that we envision having a lot of active participation and porosity in the public realm. And so you can see the relationship between the thoroughfare and those first floor uses is something that we're really trying to orchestrate as the buildings are being designed. Because this will become a street that is handed over to the public realm, to the city of Somerville, we do have to follow the appropriate lighting protocols. And so the street lighting that will be here will utilize the city of Somerville's standard pedestrian fixtures. We have two types of lights proposed. At the intersections and ends of the street, we would use the taller fixture shown on the right, which is the arm with the pendant. And then in between that, we would use the standard sort of post top light to make sure that we have adequate light levels throughout the open space. In terms of the parking, we've gone through a few iterations with the UDC, and really we're encouraged by them and the mobility department to reduce the number of parallel parking spaces. So the current plan has 20 spaces, which are 22 by 7 feet in dimension, and then additionally 3 van accessible spaces, which are 22 feet by 8 feet. Those are shown in the blue. Biking is obviously a very important part of the mobility plan. We want to encourage bicycle mobility as much as possible. So the plan currently shows within the thoroughfare 66 permanent bicycle spaces. Those are shown in yellow. In addition to the thoroughfare itself, there will be additional parking for bikes within the civic spaces and within each of the building parcel limits themselves. So master plan wide, the project will deliver 320 plus bicycle parking spaces, and those are exterior spaces, not what's in the garages. And then the master plan also will include 3 blue bike stations, each holding 19 bikes. I mentioned that the street could be shut down to activation, and so this is a diagram that shows that were the street to be shut down to the cars, those flex or hybrid use zones could be turned over to stalls or vendor tents, things like that, so that there's an activated use that's happening along the street. And then between those tent stalls is where all the festival activities and the street fairs and so forth can occur. Part of the resiliency that we're trying to boost here is the idea of bioinfiltration planters. So the way the topography of the site works is that from the north side or top of the plan, the thoroughfare is basically sheet pitched to the south. That's indicated by those black arrows that you see. And on the low side of the thoroughfare, we're proposing that the landscape beds to be bioinfiltration planters that can take on the stormwater, store it, slow it down, have that water be uptaken by the plants that are in those beds. And really, this is something that we see as a positive attribute in terms of really boosting the overall resiliency of the project. And then we have a few images here that show what the materials will be. So we have two options in play. The first option is what we call the modular bands. You can see the patterning that we're showing suggests the type of movement along the linear axis of the thoroughfare. And the idea here is to make it feel, again, more of a pedestrian space and less of a vehicular route. A blow-up of that shows how we would achieve that. In this scheme, we're looking at a concrete cast-in-place surface that will be demarcated by different types of finishes, whether it be an exposed aggregate with an integral color or playing with the different types of textures on the concrete to give it different types of texture to it to really have it look like different panels. The idea is that there's a modular aspect to this that should there have to be repairs made to the thoroughfare over time, then there's a logical way to kind of cut out the segments and then have them be replaced and have it look less like a problematic patch and more of an integration with the design. The second option that we're leaning towards actually is called the staggered edge. You can see that it's sort of a running bond pattern that suggests the movement through the center of the thoroughfare. And a blow up of that shows that we're achieving this movement through a combination of standard boom finish concrete, concrete that has a silica carbide finish, which would provide a little bit of fleck and sparkle at night, and then a silica carbide finish that would have a deep tining, which would give it sort of a raked look. And these are some images of what those various components could look like. So on the left, some images of exposed aggregate. Next to that, integral color, where you can see the banding between the colored and uncolored concrete. Silica carbide next to that, where you can see the fleck of that aggregate that catches light. And then the tined on the right side, which shows how the texture of the concrete can really contrast between smoother and coarser finishes. A big part of the project is the tree proposal. So we know through the standards and the zoning, the minimum requirements is that for a new thoroughfare, trees need to be spaced between 35 and 45 feet on center. At the length of this thoroughfare, that would produce 41 trees. And we know that the minimum caliper size for planted trees in the city's zoning is a 2-inch caliper or DBH tree. So when you calculate that out, standard zoning or base zoning would produce 82 total caliper inches. This plan provides a much more robust tree planting program. So you can see through the clustering of the trees, we end up with 62 total trees, and we're proposing a 3-inch DBH or caliper tree. So in aggregate, that would be 186 caliper inches, which is a significant increase over the base zoning. This was something that we had conversations with PSUF and the Department of Urban Forestry over, and they support the idea of us really trying to maximize the amount of tree cover as well as the species diversity of the street trees. So we do have some planting goals. Again, we want to maximize the tree canopy. Because this is a city street, we're following the city's streetscape planting recommendations. We've committed to a minimum of 50% native species. In all likelihood, it'll be significantly more than that. We do have to get PSUP's buy-in on that, however. We want to focus on the long-term health and survivability, make sure that they're not overly fussy plantings that require a lot of horticultural care. And then we want to maximize ecological value by using high-value species that support habitat and pollinator species. And this is a list of some of the trees that are taken from the city's plant list. In terms of the planting, we have two types. We have the non-bio-infiltration plantings, which are just really tough, urban-tolerant streetscape plantings that you see here. And then in the bioinfiltration areas that we know are subject to water intake, we need to have special species that can tolerate infrequent periods of inundation. So these are some of the species that are at home in wetland areas and can take that influx of water. These are some quick cross sections that show the experience through the thoroughfare. So the first one is cut between building 2 on the right and building 5 on the left. As you enter into the Boynton Yards area, you can see the moved zone, which is the 20-foot wide shared use zone shown in purple in the middle. To either side of that, the hybrid zone, in this case, 14 feet and 15 feet wide. We are proposing that the street trees have the suspended pavement soil systems, the silvicels, really trying to maximize the soil volume for those trees so that they thrive. And then next to the hybrid zone, we have the minimum 6-foot wide, but in this case, 8-foot or 11-foot wide pedestrian zones, which will be concrete. In this case, there's an expanded sidewalk as you get into the arcade of Building 2. This is a section through the 2 civic spaces. So on the right-hand side, Civic Space 1, which is currently under development, and to the left, Civic Space 3, which is coming down the pipeline. Again, you can see the various components of that streetscape as they move through. And then the last section is cut through Building 3, which will be presented momentarily. And then on the left, Building 6, which is the proposed residential building, where it has a large open space courtyard. So you can see how the open space sort of expands beyond the thoroughfare and into that open space of Building 6. Now we have some really quick model shots to show what this will look like. Here's a bird's eye view that shows kind of looking down the center point of the street of the thoroughfare. To the left, Civic Space 1 with the proposed civic arbor and the flexible lawn, and to the right is Civic Space 3. You get a sense of the texturing and the movement of the pattern through the street, as well as the detectable warning strips that signify to pedestrians that they're leaving a pedestrian zone and entering into a shared use zone. You also get a sense of the vegetation and of the street trees along the streetscape. And here's a ground level shot looking towards the west. You get a sense of the vegetation that's proposed in the beds, as well as the street trees that line either side of the thoroughfare. Here's a detail from the pedestrian zone, looking at some of these pedestrian gathering areas where we have streetscape furniture and plantings that kind of make opportunities for people to pause and enjoy the public realm. And then here's a shot of the thoroughfare when it's given over to an event. So in place of the parking stalls is where you would have tents and vendor setup and things of that nature. And then another shot showing how some of the parklet aspect can be employed by removing the cars in the parking spaces and having movable furniture set up. The materials proposed are consistent with the rest of the Boynton Yards development. So our signature wood and steel bench, the bike racks, the bollards, again, the city standard lights, the planting and pavers for the permeable strip will be consistent. The paving patterns and pallets will be the same color mix, and then the tree protection guards will also be consistent. And these are some details of the bioinfiltration and how that'll work. So essentially these beds are sunken down a little bit below the average grade, and stormwater is allowed to enter in them either through trench drains or breaks in the curbs. Over time, that water will sit and then be taken up by the plants and then into the storm drainage system where it will be cleaner and in lesser volumes. And then in terms of the phasing, I had mentioned that we have a 3-phased approach. So phase 1 is basically proposing to construct the south side of the thoroughfare from 808 Windsor all the way through 101 South. That is scheduled to be the third quarter of next year through the first quarter of 2024. And then the second phase happens beginning in the third quarter of 2024 through the first quarter of 2025 and includes the south side of the thoroughfare adjacent to 99 South, as well as wrapping around on Harding Street. And then the third and final phase would be to construct the entirety of the northern portion of the thoroughfare. And that would be scheduled to start hopefully third quarter of 2025 to the second quarter of 2027. And this is a diagram that just puts them all together, showing where the various phases occur and when. So in terms of next steps, the process you see up here is what we've been through. Here we are in the fall of 2022 meeting with you today. Our next steps are to get into the design development and begin that permitting process with the city. We understand that the thoroughfare is one of the first, if not the first, to go through the new process for permitting. So we're excited and eager to begin that process. And I think with this, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Griffin just to speak on some of the staff report conditions.
Thanks, Ian. It's Kevin Griffin with Legum Call Properties again with the owner. We just wanted to clarify a couple of the conditions in the staff report related to timing and phasing of the thoroughfare. and when kind of work would occur and when it would be conveyed to the city. So two, and we can certainly follow up with staff on this in more detail, but two changes, two conditions that are listed here in the blue text. One we've edited, which we should have just redlined so you can see the changes, but we added that under the legal agreements condition that the thoroughfare 1 must be dedicated to the public by covenant fee transfer to the city or other deed restriction pursuant to the phasing approved in the January 20th, 2022 amended master plan special permit. The highlight there is the fee transfer, which was a part of the approved master plan and included in the zoning, and just referencing back to the master plan. On the second one, relates to timing of the acceptance of the thoroughfare of the public way as a public way. And so we wanted to highlight the last, I'll just jump right down to the last section that says, is a cutout from the master plan special permit decision condition that says thoroughfare 1 Archibald Corey Way must be dedicated to the public by covenant or other deed restriction following completion of construction. So we just want to make sure that the timing of the improvements and the conveyance to the city of the road as a public way is consistent with the amended master plan phasing and conditions, with such as the condition that was excerpted here. So we just wanted to call those out for the board's review and consideration. And I'll also let Andrew Graminsky comment if he would like to add his input as well.
Does that conclude your presentation on this application?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I would welcome Andrew's thoughts on some of the proposed revisions to the staff conditions. They seem to make sense, but I welcome your expertise on whether they make as much sense as they seem to make to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Andrew Graminsky, planner with Planning, Conservation, and Zoning. Regarding the first condition with the thoroughfare and its next steps for becoming a thoroughfare following construction, there was an amendment to the zoning ordinance in 2021 that never made it onto the text that's available online on the somervillezoning.com. It was part of Municode, but I know most members of the public are used to using it on somervillezoning.com, so we do apologize for that. But yes, there is another clause basically that says that the thoroughfares, and I'm going to find you the exact language, and I can read that to you. So it is section, it should read section, hold on a second, 8.4.8.c. All thoroughfares, excluding alleys and civic spaces, must be dedicated to the public in perpetuity by covenant or other deed restriction, or conveyed to the city of Somerville in accordance with section 15.6.1 land conveyance. So staff have no problem amending this condition. We will basically just add on that clause that I said at the end of that zoning regulation to read as how it reads in the zoning ordinance. And regarding the timing, the current existing development covenant for the master plan has the timing for the thoroughfare. So we also can amend the sort of remove sort of that last clause relating to applying for a building permit for building 3. Instead, we'll revise it that it needs to comply with the timing that's laid out in the development covenant. And then the second condition that Kevin brought up regarding the phasing. The reason that staff originally phased it to be for the dedication to happen, or should I say the acceptance as a public way at the end of phase 3, was that there are some public improvements that will occur along the north side of thoroughfare 1. However, I was able to discuss with Kevin Roche from engineering that what sort of their definition of an accepted way would be. It's basically all gets down to dimensions. So it's not necessarily full improvements or everything is done. It's just the road itself, it's a flush condition and it meets sort of engineering standards. So staff don't have any concerns moving it to phase 2 conditions being phased out. and then having it accepted and not waiting till the end of phase 3. And we can work with the applicant on that language and make sure that we provide you with what that condition language would look like at the next hearing.
I appreciate that, Andrew. Thank you very much. I have just a couple of comments and questions. What I'd like to do is wait until after I hear from my fellow board members and public testimony, because I don't think my comments are terribly substantive and I don't want to take away from people's time. Does anybody else on the board have any comments or questions of applicant or the staff at this time on this application? Yes, Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for Andrew. I was just looking for some clarification on what you just said in terms of when the city would take title to the road. Is it just when the sort of pavement is down and before all the treatments for the street trees and everything else are in place, so it's not fully improved yet? Or what stage would the city be taking over the phase 1 northern road?
So the applicant will be doing all the construction of the thoroughfare. When it's conveyed to the city, there's a city council process for it being accepted as a public way, and generally the direction that the city council will take is from engineering, who are sort of the overseers from the city standpoint during the streetscape construction phase, which is the actual construction of the road. And again, after a conversation I had with Deputy Director Roche, it's really down to sort of the dimensions of itself, and that it's not all improvements like I stated. So it's not necessarily just the plantings and the lighting and the actual materiality. It could just be the pavement, and it's operable, so cars and trucks are able to drive down it and people are allowed to walk on it. And again, that would happen at the end of phase 2 of the master plan if we did revise that condition. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else on the planning board have anything they'd like to ask? See Aaron's head.
You, Mr. Chair. I do have a few questions, but I would like to hold off until after public testimony.
As will I. John, do you have anything at this time, or do you want to wait?
Mr. Chair, I would like to wait as well until public testimony has been completed. Thank you.
Great. So no further comments or questions of the planning board at this time until testimony is concluded. I would like to open up this meeting for public testimony. For anybody that wants to speak in support of the application, please exercise your raised hand, and I'll call on you in which I see you. Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing, and I'm going to open it up to anybody that wants to speak in opposition of the application or otherwise express concern. I see no hands raised. Once, you know what, I see Councilor Scott's hand is raised, so if the councilor could please be unmuted and be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly not speaking in opposition here tonight. Just wasn't sure what order you want to call on me here.
In what capacity, Councilor?
as the board counselor hosted the meeting, sir.
Yep. I was going to let the public speak, and then I was going to open it up to you if you wanted to speak in your official capacity, because the board also has some questions that we may want to ask of you.
All right, I will hold.
Okay. Anybody from the public have any comments or questions that they would like to speak in opposition or express concern? Seeing none, I will close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to further discussion by members of the planning board. And I would also like to recognize Councilor Scott in his official capacity so that he might be able to address the board and the public on this application. Could we, Councilor Scott, can you, did you want to speak?
Yeah, my apologies, sir. My apologies. So, I hosted the neighborhood meetings about this, and I will say all those meetings are recorded. I hope the planning board was provided with links for those recordings. Is that correct?
I think we probably were. Is that right, Emily?
If they were not provided, then you were provided with overviews of the hearings and neighborhood meetings, UDC meetings, and all of the minutes should be available online.
Okay, great. Well, I know Mr. Graminsky was present for both meetings. Just as a matter of course, I record every neighborhood meeting that I host. So if any member of the board does have questions or concerns, you're all obviously welcome to attend, but they are available for watching later. In each case, particularly with regards to Thoroughfare 1 here, there was a lot of discussion, some very thoughtful questions, and overall overwhelming support for the designs and concepts laid out. Again, there were some very thoughtful questions laid out, some of which went down to the granularity of the treatments on the tree wells that were designed and shown. In that particular case, there was some objection to anti-skateboarder architecture or any implementation of hostile architecture down there. But the general proposal for the streets was broadly supported. And speaking frankly, I'm not sure this is the best possible streetscape implementation, but it certainly stands in stark contrast to not only what the city currently has, but what the city frequently proposes for our street redesign. So I think there's a lot of really great steps forward here. And I can say honestly that there was large support both from the broader neighborhood and from the Union Square Neighborhood Council for this design for Archibald Quarry Way. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's not too often that we hear very, very overwhelming positive reviews from neighborhood meetings. Usually it's the applicant says everything went great, and then the councilor says, well, we were actually at the meeting. No, it didn't. It's
you and me
nice,
both, Mr. Chair.
Nice to hear that we're on the same page. Okay, so I'd like to, Councilor, unless you have any other comments, I don't have any questions for you. I just want to appreciate your recital of the history of this.
Happy to listen to the deliberations, and if I can be helpful, I'm here.
Thank you. So I do know that both Aaron and Jahan wanted to wait until the end of the copious public testimony to be able to ask their questions. So I'd like to, I saw Aaron's hand first, so I'd like to recognize Aaron if you'd like to go.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple actually. I can start off with one that might require some research or getting back next meeting. And it was actually about the paving scheme. So I noticed you guys kind of had two options, one that running bond, which I think was shown in a lot of the pictures in the sort of design views. The other was this like those linear blocks or those blocks next to each other running in parallel to, basically the direction of travel as opposed to perpendicular to the direction of travel. And I was, and in particular, they're kind of scattered and off a little random. And I was wondering if there's any safety literature around that, just because I haven't seen that as a condition, frequently. And I know you know, if you have sort of lines going ahead of you and they start jogging a lot, folks on bikes or folks in cars might tend to weave. And when you have a shared street like this, I was just wondering if, you know, there's any precedent for that kind of design, or if there's any safety literature around that sort of design pattern.
Sure. So we know that a lot of the contrast in the paving has to do with demarcating to pedestrians when they're crossing from one zone into another. And the thought is that by having it run parallel with the longitudinal axis of the thoroughfare, that there really wouldn't be a lot of that cross connectivity issues with that. We think, in fact, that the modeling of the pavement will actually help to kind of slow traffic down and tell people to be careful, basically. It's sort of a traffic calming device. But I know that the city engineering department has specific thoughts on what those materials are and what the color contrast is. And I think they're leaning towards option 2, which is the more running bond aspect. And we expect that we'll be into sort of detailed conversations with them about what that material is and how much contrast there is between the various panels.
Okay. That's helpful to hear that it's sort of a discussion with the city. I mean, I guess I would leave it in some ways up to the experts in the engineering department as one board member, but I'm glad to hear that you guys are having that conversation. And then sort of the second question was around some of the light fixtures. I know you kind of touched on it at the very beginning, but in particular around building 6, which is a residential building, I was wondering what the considerations are for the sort of, you know, light on stick kind of lighting fixture as opposed to the hooded lantern. If those were going to be proximate to that residential building, and if so, I know it's still in the design phase, how you anticipate, you know, sort of mitigating that condition for future residents.
Sure, yeah, that's a fair concern. I think as we run into with a lot of the residential developments that we work on, we have to consider things like house side shields that get applied to the fixture so that there's no adverse light that hits the abutting property. I think there's probably also an opportunity to use asymmetrical distribution, which is a way of saying that through today's technology with LED fixtures and the way the lamps are set up, that you can actually throw light in one direction and not in another direction from something like a post top light. So I think we absolutely have to understand where the light is going and making sure that it is only going where we want it to go.
Right. Okay. I guess I would be supportive of, you know, anything that we can do to make sure that we protect that future residential use and sort of light concerns from that, just as a comment. And then last question, which is there currently, I know you have 3 phases of construction for the streetscape, and considering, you know, in phase 1, you're putting down, I think, would be half of those street trees, right? So like some 30 or 20, it looks like 20 odd trees, if the full total is like that 64. What are your plans for protecting those newly planted trees during construction of buildings 5, 6, and 1?
It's a good question. I think we would have to employ the typical sort of tree protection measures, whether it be lumber around the trunks or in the cases where we have the ability to put fencing around the trees. I think it's likely that, you know, when they're actually constructing, say, the northern portion of the street, that there would be some type of a temporary barricade that would basically keep all construction activity to the, you know, the north side of that barricade. But it's something that we're going to, you know, in our contract documents, we're going to require that the trees be preserved, and we'll have language in our specs about if trees are damaged that are called out to be preserved, then there's penalties to the contractor that they have to repair and, you know, replace with a penalty the trees that are being removed or damaged.
Okay, yeah. I mean, maybe this is something we could discuss as a board. I know we did something similar for protecting existing trees with the recent Davis Square approval. And I would be supportive of, you know, if my other board members support and if the applicant would be, you know, amenable, something similar in this case, just to make sure that, you know, we're protecting what we put down in this first phase through what's going to be a long project.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the end of my comments. I will yield back. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, no. Aaron, I recall we had, so in the Davis Square, those are trees that were already existing, if I recall. So there's a little bit of a difference between trees that are being planted, like is being proposed here, versus trees that existed that were going to be in the midst of construction. And I have no idea if we're talking about phasing, at what phase the trees come in, right? Do they come in at the end of, come in mid-construction? I think that's something that that should be kind of discussed, whether it's, you know, between the board or between the applicant and staff on the appropriate phasing of that, because, you know, nobody wants to see new trees being damaged in the, you know, scope of construction. So I think that is something that we I'd like to ask staff for the next time we approach this, what the recommendation is for the best way to move that forward, because in Davis Square we were talking about big trees that already existed as opposed to small trees that are being planted.
And if I may,
Mr. Chair, could I respond?
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to point out first that we have fantastic staff with public space and urban forestry who are experts on this subject when it comes to protecting trees. Vanessa Bukili, our city forester, urban forester, and I do, you know, want to say to the applicant just to make sure you coordinate with PISA regarding sort of the protection of those trees overall. But we also, as staff and planning, can coordinate with PISA on sort of how that can be done and maybe potentially with language if the board would like to see that from staff. Maybe a phasing plan for protecting the trees is an idea I thought of, but we can definitely come back with more information at the next meeting.
I appreciate that, Andrew. I think if I'm remembering a few weeks ago for the discussion that we had about the trees in Davis Square, I think we came down with a pretty generic condition that made the applicant adhere to working with PSUP and the other appropriate city departments to make sure that the trees were preserved to the maximum extent possible. So something like that, maybe in conjunction with, you know, a discussion with PSUP about phasing of planting, because I'm in no way a tree expert, and that's why we have excellent staff that are. Aaron, did you have anything else that you wanted to?
Nope, I think that generally makes sense to me, and leaving it to, you know, our urban forestry department who specializes in this makes a ton of sense. And I would love to give them, you know, whatever tools they need to have those productive discussions.
Sure. Jahan, I know you wanted to speak as well, so if you still want some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. The first question is for the applicant. I think it was the second slide where you had the phasing of the phasing timeline of the thoroughfare, and basically the question that I have is yes. So the question that I have is with respect to the phasing. I know that you had mentioned that it's going to be generally linked to the construction of the buildings adjacent to the sidewalk or the road. I'm just curious to better understand how closely linked will the phasing be to the actual construction. The reason why I ask this is because if there are any unexpected or unintended delays with respect to the building construction, is this phasing plan still going to move forward, or is it tethered to the building construction?
I don't know, Kevin, if you want to take this one. My understanding is that, we would potentially have to pause things if there was something happening relative to the building construction that would impede the construction of the thoroughfare, but we don't anticipate that happening.
Yeah, that's correct. This is Kevin Griffin with Legg McCall Properties. To everyone's point, you don't want to start installing, for example, the northern sidewalks and then have to rip them up, or trees and rip them up, to put in utilities or underground infrastructure when you go to build those buildings. So we envision getting the pieces of Thoroughfare 1 completed in as much as we can in each chunk. But I think to your point that regardless of each step of the way, that we need to consider, if buildings do not move forward, that we have temporary measures that meet the standards of the thoroughfare that we intend to construct, so that we can complete the details once those buildings are ready to be developed. We also have, through our approved master plan, a performance bond to cover the civic spaces and public way infrastructure work. So should things become delayed for an extended period of time, there's always mechanisms to get infrastructure work completed if necessary.
Understood. That's very helpful, because I follow the logic. I'm fully supportive of the logic behind the phasing. I just wanted to make sure that we had a good understanding, a good grasp of what may happen should there be unintended or unexpected events in the future. So that's very helpful. Thank you. My second question is actually directed towards staff, and it's great that Mr. Guminski is available as well. I really want to better understand, when we talk about the thoroughfare being closed, and I think it's great that the thoroughfare will have the opportunity to be closed for events and other outdoor gatherings, if you will. I just want to better understand, how does the process work of the thoroughfare closure? Is this something that's under the purview of the city of Somerville, or is it something that may be dictated between the Boynton Yards development and the city? I just want to get a point of clarification there.
Good question. So I'm going to try my best to answer the question, but I may need to consult with other staff. Emily, if you know some, you can jump in too. But it's my understanding that once it's conveyed to the city will basically be able to decide sort of those measures when it comes to. It looks like Councillor Scott can answer this question. So maybe we can let Councillor Scott chime in. Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Guminski. Mr. Chair, if you please.
Yes, if you can.
Sure. Once the property is conveyed to the city, it becomes a public way. Any closure of a public way either has to happen through a permit by engineering, for example, in the case of the crane that's getting taken down right now on Prospect Street, which I've received 4 calls about during this actual meeting. But also for things like the closure of Springfield Street for trick-or-treating that is happening on Monday. I do respectfully submit to the board that is the best trick-or-treating in the city of Somerville. So, but that closure has to go through a process that is an application to the city clerk's office, and then goes to the city council for approval like any other public event license. So there are multiple ways to get that public way closed, but for public events or a farmer's market or things like that, they generally have to go through the clerk's office, get approval by multiple departments, and then go to the city council for approval. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Scott, and also Mr. Guminski. And I just wanted to also go on record by saying that I think it's wonderful that this thoroughfare includes the consideration of closure for community-oriented events. I think that's really important, and I just wanted to commend the applicant on that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I had.
Great. Thanks, John. Debbie, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask of this application? Okay, I had two, one comment, one question, and I'm actually glad that Erin kind of identified the comment that I had is about the way that the street is laid out with the materials that are used. If it's going to be used, and actually I very much respect your response to Erin's question, because I think it moderates some of the concern that I had, was if I'm driving down the street, or if I'm, riding a bike down the street, I'm used to seeing, some sort of a lane demarcation where I know that somebody's not going to cross in front of me, and, people aren't going to weave. And in the absence of that, I was a little bit concerned if it wasn't just going to be a pedestrian way. But then you replied that the change in materiality serves as a traffic calming measure. And I was thinking about, if I was actually driving on that street, I would probably slow down because I recognize it's not a regular street. So I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at the problem that I kind of identified, and Erin did too. But obviously, I think we need to have a little further discussion, as we were talking about earlier, as to the best way to do that. That was kind of my comment. My question is, I'm wondering if we could go back to one of those slides that you had presented, where there was people sitting around a park bench and things like that on the sidewalk.
Sure, I can scroll through and you can tell me which one.
Yeah. Here's that one. When you were talking earlier, you were talking about the sidewalk being generally about 6 feet wide, but then also having wider sections. So this is clearly one of the wider sections based on what I'm looking at now. From what it looks like, is the sidewalk goes from the edge of that building all the way out to where that, white car is. At least that's how it perceives to me. I'm curious as to how much of the street is about this, or the sidewalk is about this wide versus 6 feet, because obviously this is a lot more usable for people when it's not closed down as a pedestrian way, versus just a kind of regular sidewalk width.
Right, so I think what you're asking, and maybe I can clarify the intent, is that the quote unquote sidewalk or pedestrian zone basically happens from, if you can see my hand, sort of where the bench is here, all the way to the face of building. However, there is a thoroughfare line or a property line that basically kind of goes 6 feet or so off the edge of the bench. So, there's a minimum of 6 feet, but in most cases it exceeds 6 foot width because it extends beyond the property line to the recessed building face.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Because I was looking at that, I was like, that's not 6 feet.
No,
if you're talking about the actual sidewalk being 6 feet, but then there is additional space that is, part of the, building curtilage.
Yeah, I'd say in most cases, pretty much everywhere, we exceed 6 feet. It's just that the zoning says that the minimum width has to be 6 feet. So we made sure that we had that.
Okay, that answers my question. So I don't have anything further to add at the time of this meeting. Does anybody else have anything else before we close this one out for a couple of weeks? Okay. The next meeting is the 10th of November, and the Friday before that is the 4th. So I'm going to leave written comment open till noon on November 4th on this application. So anybody that wants to submit written comments can do so at planning@somervillema.gov. I would like to welcome the applicant to make a presentation on the third portion of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Rola speaking again on behalf of the applicant. So if we can make David Nagahiro presenter for this presentation, you guys see that he's on. David is with CBT, and he'll be leading the discussion for 99 South.
Mr. Nagahiro, I have just made you a presenter, so you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. As Rola said, I'm David Nagahiro, architect with CBT. I'll start the presentation for Building 3. By way of introduction, just a quick introduction of where we were. I'll move relatively quickly through that, as some of it's a repeat of some of the things that Ian had shown. I'll go through the building design. I'll turn it over to Ian for the landscape design, talk a little bit about sustainability, and then finish up with John talking about the community benefits. Similarly, with the schedule, the master planning amendment, the individual building permit, community process, the winter 2021, spring 2022, kicking off the Building 3, the thoroughfare 1. Similarly, with what Ian had shown, this is the location, just by way of orientation, of Building 3. In plan, just looking at 99 South in relationship to the Boynton Yards master plan and its proximity to the new T station and the Union Square. And then a little bit closer in, looking at it in relation to 101 South, 880 Windsor, the first and second phases, and then 99 South that we'll be focused on tonight. The building design itself, again, in relationship to Building 1, just to the right where you see my hand is Building 3. On the other side of the civic space is Building 2 in the second phase. We'll be focused on Building 3 tonight, 99 South. Again, the goals are all very much in keeping with the kind of requirements of 20% civic space, 75% of the gross square footage, 10 and 5% of the arts and the creative, as well as community space, 25% being the residential. And then this particular building, 99 South, will be LEED Platinum. Again, in relationship in the 3D, looking at the public realm along South Street, on the southern side, this is 99 South at E3. To the north is the thoroughfare that Ian was explaining, and then just to the west is 101 South. We've spoken a little bit about some of the overall concepts of scale transition and transitions from South Street from a 4-story up to, as it kind of rises to the south, to the north. The idea of transitions, really making the ground plane as active as possible. The transitions to the arcades and the public realm, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then the activation along Harding Street and the thoroughfare. The overall massing, we had looked at a number of massing strategies, but really focused in on the step because it really created that kind of building and scale transition for the building itself. And then looking at the development strategy of the site, the maximum site potential, the idea of setting back along the southern side and northern sides of the building to be able to create scaling elements for the building. And then the transition of not only the arcade along the south side, but then a kind of a breaking of the skin and creating that kind of stepping in relationship to the scale transition from the south to the north. And on the ground plane, the site concept on the left-hand side, where you see the 3 pink arrows, the idea of the continuity of that public realm. That's a continuation along South Street. We have an arcade as well. On the northern side of the site, we have entry into the building as well, and that thoroughfare and the real activation along that edge. In the middle diagram, we see the pink area, which is really trying to take the lion's share of the frontage along South Street, Harding, and the thoroughfare, and making it as active as possible. And then the Earl Street is a little bit more of the utilitarian street where we have the loading dock. So really trying to consolidate that and maximizing the public amenity on the other 3 streets. I will go into this in a little bit more detail in just a second, but just by way, again, of orientation, we have South Street along the southern side of the building. Thoroughfare 1 is the northern side. To the east, we have Harding Street, and to the west, we have Grove Street. And I won't go through this because Ian will be going through the landscape plan in a little bit more detail later on. So I'll move on. As we look more closely to the ground floor plan, this is again, sorry for the reorientation, but on the southern side of the South Street, we have the large setback. We have the arcade, which is aligns with the arcade to 101, and then really taking the lion's share of the faces along South Street, Harding Street, and Thoroughfare 1 and making them active. And I'll have Ian talk a little bit more about the landscape in just a second. Again, taking the gray area, which is the entry to the garage ramp, the back of house, the loading docks, and trying to consolidate that as much as possible along Earl Street, which is also in kind of in relationship to the loading in 101. And then taking the retail, arts and space along these edges and trying to activate the three sides as much as possible. So the entry or the primary lobby entry sequence is off of the corner of Harding and South Street. There's another entry into the building along Thoroughfare as well. And then really taking those edges and really activating them as well. The typical floor plate on the upper level with the core, and then looking at it more in 3D, so this will give you a better idea of the relationship of the massing and the streets itself. This is looking from the south. We have South Street in the foreground, Harding along the eastern side of the building. Again, looking at the materiality for the building, having this 4-story massing along South Street, stepping back. So you can see in the east elevation, we have the South Street Thoroughfare on the other side, and the scale sort of stepping up, the zipper that we were calling it, creating the massing transition from the south to the north. This is a terracotta building, so it's really beautiful kind of masonry building, really looking at a kind of a new industrial sort of feel to the building, and that feeling kind of rooted in the site. Looking at the overall massing, again, we've taken up the skin one level above the highest occupiable floor to really create and reduce the impact of the mechanical penthouse at the top of the building. As we continue to the north side of the building, this is where the scale transition goes from the 4-story along South Street and steps up to the Thoroughfare 1 side of the building. The materiality, again, is the terracotta. We really like this because it has that kind of warmth of quality and kind of a reminiscent of some of the buildings that were here in the past. Using the 2-story treatment and a break every 2 stories to create that scale transition and the proportioning transition. That zipper that we're calling kind of wrapping around the building to create that kind of break in the facade and creating the transition from the south side to the north side. And then within the terracotta itself, we're looking at another pattern within the building to create a little bit of modeling. So it's not just one monotone color, but it has a kind of very subtle transition to the materials and the scale itself. Looking from the corner of South Street in the foreground and Harding Street, again, we have that 4-story piece that kind of sets back and steps back, and that's where we have an outdoor terrace. The arcade aligns with the arcade along 101 as well. This is where the primary entry into the building is, and that will be a 2-story entry to really create that kind of grand hierarchy of entry into the building. And then along Harding Street, and we'll take a look at that in just a second, really activating that edge as well. This is where you see the terracotta and the module coming down to the ground, so really grounding itself, and then the building stepping back, and then that zipper detail that we talked about that provides that transition from the south side of the building to the north. As we do a little cutaway, this gives you a better idea 3-dimensionally of the relationship of the building in relationship to the public realm and the landscape, which I'll have Ian explain a little bit more. But again, the generous setback here, you can see the arcade that aligns with the arcade from 101. We also have a series of bicycle racks around the site as well to really activate that and really promote the bike culture here as well. You can see the arts and the creative enterprise spaces that wrap around along the three sides along South Street, Harding, as well as Thoroughfare, as well as the mechanical and the loading docks that are happening along Earl Street. So this is an aerial as we kind of come up above looking at South Street. You can see the very generous setback along South Street to the building face. Again, facing that with aligning it with 101. This will be the 4-story where we're ending up setting back the building. As we come down to the ground plane, this is at the corner of Earl Street and South Street. Again, staying on the southern side of the building. The large setback here, you can see the bikes adjacent to it, the 4-story terracotta base that provides that kind of a setback in the terrace on the upper level. As we move in a little bit more closely, you see the relationship to the walkway, the bike storage area for the retail to spill out into this southern side of the building, and the arcade making the transition to the retail and the lobby space. So we move to the other side. This is where we have the 2-story lobby on the right-hand side. You see the arcade that aligns to the arcade on 101. As you continue down on the right-hand side along Harding Street, also activating that edge as well. As we continue down Harding Street, you can see again on the left-hand side is the 2-story lobby, and then the transition to the 1-story retail, reaching out toward the street and really looking to have that open out onto the street and activate the streetscape along Harding as it turns the corner to Thoroughfare as well. Looking at third corner of Thoroughfare and Harding, this is again where we are really trying to create the lion's share of the retail along these edges to really activate this. This is where Ian was describing the kind of the nature of the landscapes on Thoroughfare and the base of the building. This is where the building actually steps up to the north. Looking from a distance, we were asked to take a look at from Prospect Hill, and you can see the building 101 and then 99 right next to it. As we're looking from Union Square itself, you can see the outline of the building in red. And then from just beyond the target to the north, beyond that on the other side of it, you can see 101 and then 99. So. And now I'll turn it over to Ian to talk about the landscape.
Thank you, David. Hello again, everyone. For the record, Ian Ramey, Copley Wolf Design Group. So as David had mentioned, the landscape and public realm design really carries forward the principles established for 101 South as well as the overall master plan. In this particular site on the south side, which is the left-hand side of the view, we have a broad south-facing plaza that has varying degrees of enclosure and experience. So along South Street, we have our protected bike lanes and typical sidewalk streetscape. We have a blue bike station that's being proposed as well as a bench seat. And then as we move into the property parcel line proper, we have a unit paver terrace that has a grove of trees to provide shade, again on the south side of the building. And then moving closer to the building, it transitions into that open space that goes within the colonnade. So really there's a varying degree of enclosure as you get closer to the building. Along Harding Street, which is the bottom side, that's more of a neighborhood street where we have the active edges and then the robust tree planting with silvacells to make sure that those trees provide a lot of cover over the hardscape. Then as we turn around the corner to the north side or right side of the view, that's where the building interacts with Thoroughfare 1, which we described before. But again, the idea is that there's opportunities for different types of spill out space and subspaces for pedestrians to engage with the building active uses and also have interaction with that landscape. As we go around to the north or to the west side, which is up on the plan, that's Earl Street. Again, that's the service drive that kind of mirrors the operation of 101 South. And the idea there is that at the back of curb, we have a 5-foot wide, heavily vegetated buffer edge to sort of protect the pedestrians and make it feel less like a service drive and more like a comfortable pedestrian experience. And if you could go to the next slide. So obviously for the building, we have to comply with green score, which is always a challenge. But in this case, we do meet the minimum. In fact, we exceed it. The parcel limits is the dashed black line. Within that, we are meeting the green score through the use of large shade trees, which are shown in pink. We also have permeable pavements and the requisite 24-inch depth soil to get us closer to the score. And in this case, we do have to provide a small green roof coordinated with the mechanical equipment on the roof in order to get us over that finish line for the green score. Next slide, please. And then these are just some cross sections that show that experience around the four sides of the building. So in this case, we're on the south side. Looking on the right side of this view is South Street, where you see the bike infrastructure and tree planting. Then you have that broad pedestrian zone to the left of that, 17 to 22 feet wide, which is very gracious. And then in yellow, the plaza space with the large trees and the movable furniture, and then transitioning into that covered arcade to the far left. Next slide. Here's a slide through, section rather, through the thoroughfare. So again, you see the building 6 courtyard to the right. You see the typical cross section for thoroughfare 1, which is that 62-foot wide right of way. And then you have a 6-foot planting zone and then a 9-foot wide spill out zone on the north face of the building. Next slide. And so here's a section through that neighborhood street on Harding. You can see on the right side the contextual building of the existing condition. We have a small pedestrian zone there, 20-foot wide travel, two-way travel for Harding Street. We have surface parking in this case, 7-foot wide. And then we have our requisite 2-foot buffer, 6-foot furnishing zone, and 6-foot pedestrian zone up against that active use of the building. Next slide. And then the section through Earl Street, as I had mentioned, really trying to buffer that curb edge with plantings and trees to make that 5-foot pedestrian zone feel comfortable. Next slide. Again, the materials are consistent with the rest of the Boynton Yards development. I think in this case, we do have an opportunity to do some nuanced or sort of unique aspects on the south side of the building. And that is what we're calling out the playful seating. So the idea there is that there's something that's a little bit atypical and nuanced, a little bit more whimsy and interest to that plaza. And then just some more shots of the materials. Given that the streetscape lighting will be standard Somerville lighting, we have an opportunity in the plaza space to have something that might be a little bit more architectural, which is shown in that lower left image. Next slide. And then we don't need to get into the detail, but suffice to say that it's a diverse planting plan that, again, is coordinated with the city's urban forestry plan. Next slide. And then just some images of what those proposed trees are. Again, trying to have native species, high value species, and species that offer seasonal interest throughout the year. Next slide. And that's it for landscape. Thank you.
And then on the sustainability side, we're working with Thornton Tomasetti and the requirement of a platinum LEED score for the building. And then very similar to what we had shown prior is, the energy efficiencies, the indoor air quality. So they're really adding up to really get that LEED platinum score. And I'll be turning it over to John.
Thank you, Dave, and Ian, and Rolla, and Kevin. We really feel fortunate to be able to work with such a great group, talented group of consultants and professionals on this. I mean, I think what we're doing here is we're focusing on one building, but the goal here overall is to build a place in a community that mixes commercial, lab, the local neighborhood community with arts and jobs. Our first building that was completed and fully leased is providing 900 new jobs to the city of Somerville. Second building's under construction. This building on a similar ratio would contribute another 1,100 jobs. So we feel like we're hitting the buttons and creating a place that we all can be proud of. The economic benefits here, are up to $30 million. Overall in the portfolio of approved product, $15 million in annual taxes and $13.5 million that would be contributed to the Affordable Housing Trust. I can go on and talk about all of these pieces, but in the aggregate, it really is a benefit to the city, and the community, and we really believe in this as a new place, and something that Somerville can be proud of. We certainly are, and we look forward to working with you on this project.
Mr. Chair, if we can please unmute Olivia Paulano. She'll be speaking to the slide.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. Just one moment. Oh, there we go. Ms. Paulano, I'm making you a panelist, so you should be able to unmute yourself and speak with the board.
Olivia Polano here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm a project manager for DLJ Real Estate Capital Partners, and I have been quite involved with the planning of the events listed below on this slide. The images below are a small visual representation of recent community events at Boynton Yards, which wouldn't have been possible without local partners such as Once Somerville, Event Them, Cuisine, and Locale, to name a few. So the top left depicts the second annual Oktoberfest, and this was a free, family-friendly event with complimentary food samplings. There were games and crafts and a full lineup of live entertainment, and it was really well attended by over 600 people. The second photo is from early September. Boynton Yards hosted a movie night pop-up on the lawn outside of 101 South with 2 food trucks, popcorn, and games, and Shrek was showed. It was also a pretty big hit. And the bottom left image represents the Once Somerville summer concert series at Boynton Yards. This was the second concert series that they ran, and it contained 9 concerts spanning from June to September. And in total throughout this series, there were over 2,000 attendees. About 85 local bands played, and over 40 vendors and crafters were involved with popping up market style at these concerts. And the bottom right is of a recent siren show that takes place in the 101 South Conference Room. The organizer of this show describes it as a curated artist show by fierce female voices, and it is led by comedian Kelly McFarland. So these shows have been held monthly in the conference room on the ground floor of 101 South, and thus far have involved drag performance, which is pictured, Harlow Havoc, and the host Kelly McFarland are pictured there on the bottom right, poetry readings. There have been musical performances, several comedians, burlesque, storytelling, and several dance and movement acts. And I also think it's worth mentioning that Boynton Yards has been hosting some community yoga classes also in this 101 conference space on Saturdays, and they'll continue for the foreseeable future. So that's kind of just a taste of what's been going on. So thank you for listening.
You're all invited to the next show on November 3rd, by the way.
Yes, please reach out about the siren shows. The next show is on November 3rd, and it's really quite a ride of different surprise entertainment acts. That's really all we've got for you. And if you're curious about events, our social media and our website has a calendar and pops up different details from time to time. So thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Olivia. I think that concludes our 99 South discussion, and we did want to include that community bit at the end just to show you all how active the site has been since we last met. I think we've had a ton of social impact, and we'll continue to do that as the project develops. With that,
Great.
we'll pass it back to you for questions. Thank you.
I really appreciate the presentation from everybody. Thank you very much. I do want to ask Andrew Kreminski to address the board real quickly. He had expressed a concern to me that I'd just like to make sure that we address before we move forward with discussion and testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a concern. I just wanted to point something out. So, David, could you please go to the ground floor diagram slide? Thank you. Perfect, right here. Yes. So I just wanted to point out for the record that this ground floor configuration is slightly modified from what was submitted with the application. However, I have a feeling that this has to do with a proposed condition that was in the staff memo regarding ground floor pipe parking, which I can see that you have labeled there. I just wanted to confirm with the applicant that that is the case.
Yes, Andrew, this is Rola with the applicant. That is the case. So we've accommodated bike storage where a location for potential bike storage if we were to house 25% of the required spaces on the ground level. So you see that there. What you also see here in this diagram is a bit changed from the application. We believe it's an improvement on that in that it provides the 30-foot depth throughout all the spaces as required.
Interesting. So it sounds like the first.
Could you clarify how many again?
Yeah, sorry.
I wanted to confirm the percentage of bike parking that would be able to go into that room. You mentioned 25%, and then the staff memo mentioned 30%. Recommended by staff.
I believe we have 25%, but I can check back with our team. But again, that dashed line that you see there is flexible right now, so we could, we'll see what we can accommodate in that space.
Thank you for clarifying, Rolla. Appreciate it. That's all from me, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Okay, no, Andrew, thanks for bringing that to my attention. And maybe we can get a little further clarification by the time we reconvene in a few weeks. So, what I'd like to do now is yes, he is. Councilor Scott is still with us. If the councilor would like to speak with the board about how the several neighborhood meetings that he ran went, I would be appreciative of that, or anything else that might be on his mind.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you to the honorable members. I'll start by saying I would note that a prominent Ward 3 resident was displayed on the final slide there, slide 50, and I applaud that. But I do note with mild dismay a lack of Ward 2 residents shown in this otherwise very deep presentation. All jokes aside, there is a lot of new information for myself as a ward councilor in this presentation tonight. I did host 2 neighborhood meetings on this project. Apologies, I have been lax. This is JT Scott, Ward 2 City Councilor. The meetings were extensive and the recordings are available online. From the previous discussion, it seems that most of the board members had not had the opportunity to view those meetings. If there's any question of how to access those, the same link that was publicized on the flyers, there is usually a tiny URL short link included. I'd be happy to provide that to planning staff to forward that along to you. You can watch every minute of those discussions. But I do find myself in the unusual position of praising a developer's conduct here tonight and their approach in neighborhood engagement. Several of the neighborhood's questions, suggestions, and concerns actually do appear to have been addressed in the plan presented tonight. In particular, I call out, and I'm glad we have this slide up, the ground floor layout as Ward Street comes in at the bottom of this page on Harding Street. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It was a participant in the neighborhood meeting, in the first neighborhood meeting, that actually first pointed out the view down Ward Street on its Harding Street frontage would have been blank and really highly undesirable as a condition for the neighborhood. The second meeting, there was an attempt to address that, and it did come under some criticism as well. The plan presented tonight actually shows an expanded arts and creative enterprises space on that frontage, which really does appear to me, just personally, this is the first time I've seen it, to satisfy those concerns admirably with a much deeper and more useful space. That said, I think the discussion that just happened around the potential bike storage that's labeled here indicates that there are a lot of moving parts in this right now. There's a lot that I have to digest from this presentation, and honestly, that I'd like to make sure I send out to the neighborhood. It does appear that the desire of the chair and the board is to hold on to this for a little bit, to digest it and to have some further discussion on it. But in all, as I said, I do find myself having to compliment the team on truly listening to the feedback. I would strongly request that members of the planning board do seek out those recordings if you want to hear what the neighborhood had to say. They were some very good meetings. You can maybe skip the PowerPoint at the start of it and get to the discussions in the last hour of those meetings. But you know, overall, I'm positive. I just want to reserve my complete endorsement of it because there is a lot of new information tonight that I need to digest. So I appreciate it.
Councilor Scott, can I ask a question? I think I saw it in the staff report when the last community meeting, neighborhood meeting rather, that was held on this. Was it in June? You recall?
To be honest, sir, time has very little meaning. I've had COVID since then, but I do believe that's correct.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Rola. It was in June. It was on June 25th, I believe.
Okay. Can I ask what changed with any degree of substance between that last neighborhood meeting in June and tonight? Obviously, we spoke about the addition of the bike room, but it's a little bit concerning to me to hear the councilor say that there's a lot of stuff that is new to him from when it was presented to the neighborhood back in June. I'm just curious exactly what we're talking about in the scope of changes from what the community has seen.
So I can answer that as well, Mr. Chair. This is Rola speaking. So the only changes we've made to the plan are, the first is what JT pointed out, where if you can point to it, David, we used to have a chem storage room fronting that exact intersection. So we've removed the chem storage room based on those neighborhood comments that created a blank facade on that frontage that was pretty important. So we thought that was, you know, something that we've worked hard to remove. So right now we've taken that out and replaced it with retail to make a contiguous space there. And then the latest change is on the north side based on a condition we received from Mobility that they'd like to see 30% of our required bike spaces at grade. So that has taken away from some of the A space that we had on that north side, and we've called it for now potential bike storage. But if that requirement isn't, we've tried to kind of talk to Mobility about that. We'd like to have that be retail ACE. And we do have a large extensive bike room at the first parking level, same as 101, which has been functioning great. So if we're able to be relieved of that requirement, that will potentially become retail space again. But those are the main two changes that we've made to the benefit, we think, of the plan. And nothing else has changed since then.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if it pleases you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to be very clear. This is not, my comment is not meant to be critical of the changes that I see tonight. I do see a lot of things moving in the right direction. My only hesitation is that the neighborhood meeting that I hosted happened 4.5 months ago, and unfortunately I did not have the time to go back and review the video prior to tonight's meeting. I know there was a lot of comments. I just am cautious when representing the neighborhood and saying, wow, this looks great, to make sure that I have gone back and reviewed it, to make sure that I have heard all the comments and not just the ones that particularly stuck in my mind. I am, as I'm sure you and everybody on the board is, aware that there is a bit of tug of war that happens with internal planning staff and staff from various divisions, various departments, like the bike storage discussion that was just had. I don't represent the departments of the city. I represent the 12,000 residents of Ward 2, and in particular the several hundred residents that are very near to this building. So for me, it's of utmost importance that I speak with caution when talking about plans like this. So in the interim between this and the next meeting, I will be reviewing that video and taking into account what the plan that's been presented here. And I'm sure the members of this board will as well. But I just want to make sure that I'm clear. This is not being critical of the plan. This does appear to be overall a significant improvement. And I just ask that I have the opportunity, as well as you, to listen to the feedback from that neighborhood meeting and take it into account.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for clarifying the degree of concern that you expressed. And obviously, we're not taking any action on this application tonight. We will be keeping written testimony open for a couple of weeks, so that in the event that anybody in the neighborhood or yourself, the council, wants to provide any additional comments or testimony to the board for our consideration, people will have the additional opportunity to do so. And we always take that under consideration. Because it's valuable as well. Not everybody has the opportunity to show up on a Zoom meeting at 8:30 on a Thursday night. So what I'd like to do now, before I kind of make my comments, and I don't know if anybody on the board has any comments or questions that they'd like to raise at this point. I'm going to hold off until we've heard from the public, but does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up at this point? Sorry, I made the mistake of making you all really small again. So the answer is no, right? Okay. Okay, what I'd like to do now then is open up the meeting for public testimony. So I'd like to invite anybody that wants to speak in support of the application to please raise your hand, and I'll call on you in the order in which I see your hand. Once. Going twice. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing and open it up to anybody that wants to testify in opposition of this application or otherwise express concern about it. Okay. Once, twice. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing, and I would like to open it up to discussion by members of the planning board. So I see Debbie's hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This maybe is more of a question, and I realize the bike storage is a newly added piece, but just to ask that folks consider whether we'll still be meeting our arts and creative enterprise percentages if the bike storage is added on in that particular location, and just wondering if there's a possibility to move it, maybe not towards loading. I just feel like it deactivates in some way that, main kind of pedestrian thoroughfare experience that everyone is looking to go for. So it's just a general comment there.
Yeah, Andrew.
I could probably answer some of this, Debbie, Mr. Chair, through you. So the ACE requirements for projects in the master plan area aren't specific to individual buildings. There's a percentage, 10%, throughout the development in this area. So the applicant has discretion to put the ACE space where they want, as long as they meet the requirement that's in the master plan and laid out as authorized by that master plan special permit. Now you're correct, when it comes to activating, different uses activate a street more than others. So you hit a point there. There's, again, a sort of a reason we wanted, or I should say mobility staff wanted to put that bike parking on the ground level, or a portion of it is, this isn't the only project that mobility has wanted that to happen. Many of the new projects, mobility is pushing sort of this condition to sort of, push for more people to bike, create convenience for those bikers to help meet sort of, the mobility goals laid out in Summer Vision. So that's basically the basis for that condition. But regarding the ACE requirements, staff could look more closely, but I don't think this would affect their ACE requirements as laid out in the zoning and their master plan. But if the applicant wants to provide more information, then they can as well.
Thank you. Andrew, Debbie, did you have anything else to look at?
Not at this point. I'm curious to hear the rest of the board's comments, and I may have something else as that discussion comes about.
Okay. Who's next? Okay. Okay, Aaron.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I actually have a few comments. Some around the neighborhood meetings, which we do have the notes from, although not the videos, and some more building specific and transportation wise. I would sort of generally second Debbie's comments around the sort of bike storage on ground level and the balance for, encouraging cycling and, activating the space. It's just like a comment as a cyclist, sort of locating bike storage on ground floor or ground floor bike storage, like as I commute, tends to be more for like going to a shop. And I actually get kind of annoyed when it's like all the way around on one side of the building, because then I have to like walk all the way to the back, park the bike, go back around, and it kind of defeats the purpose. I get where mobility is coming from, but if there's any more comments from mobility staff on, any data they have around that sort of requirement, I think that would be helpful for me in considering this kind of thing. Transportation wise, there were a number of comments in the neighborhood meetings around the bus network redesign. And I would love to hear the comments from either from the applicant around how heavily the transportation plans rely on the current bus network versus the proposed MBTA redesign. And maybe a question to staff of how can we consider that as the board? Like, can we because it's just plans, right? Like how can we kind of take that into effect? And maybe the first question should be for staff, which is, can we consider the proposed MBTA bus network redesign, considering that it is proposed?
Can I respond? This is John Fenton with DLJ, and we have been working independently with consultants and with staff to work on an overall mobility plan for Boynton Yards, you know, from sort of a master planning perspective. And, you know, honestly, it's a work in progress. And as you know, the suggestions made by the MBTA for rerouting buses, you know, has been revised. And I think the new one is either just come out or will shortly, and there'll be discussion about that. You know, we hope, you know, eventually to even have the bus come into Boynton Yards, or one of them, to facilitate traffic in and out. We're also working on plans to build a pedestrian bridge to connect our northern civic space, I think it's Civic Space 3, over to the Union Square station. You know, there's a lot of push and pull with mobility and development, you know, where we definitely have the same goals. But, you know, for instance, some of the requirements, you know, with the city in summer vision and the zoning do run into conflict. Like this is a perfect one where, you know, we could have another shop there, but there's also a goal to have more accessible bikes. It's hard to solve all of these ones to everyone's satisfaction. But, you know, we're doing our best, I think, and I think our goals are very generally similar to those of mobility in transportation, in that, you know, none of this is really going to work if everyone drives to work. And we definitely need to get folks out of their cars and into habits. We need to change behavior that you know, promotes bikes and other types. We're going to be working with private shuttles and extending that as well. So it's a big question that you ask, and I think there's a hard one to answer, but we're certainly working on it.
And I appreciate that response, and especially that you're kind of viewing it from a Boynton Yards master planning perspective, because it's true, getting from, you know, 101 South to 99 Harding, it's, you know, sort of the same experience.
Yeah.
I have a couple other building specific questions. After that, I'll sort of pause for now just to make sure that everybody else has time too. So one is, so what is, like, this is mostly lab building wise. And I know you have experience with this on the 101 South project. Could you maybe elaborate on how you've approached the viability of chem storage and sort of the safety considerations of satellite waste and pH balancing as you're designing the back of the house? I would like to hear sort of how you've ensured this is going to be a sort of a viable project for, you know, what's going to be probably 7 to 8 stories of lab space. And that's sort of the question there, which is, you know, what is the approach for making sure that hazardous waste situation is viable?
You know, I don't know if Kevin or Rolla are still on, but they might have a little better shot at answering that one than I would, to be honest.
Yeah, this is Kevin Griffin with Leggett McCall Properties. Just a couple of examples of what's designed into these speculative lab buildings, being that they're core and shell. We need to plan space and allocate equipment on a prospective basis to try to be flexible as we, in the future would lease to various tenants. So the users aren't identified up front, but so allocating space for a chemical storage room is really just it's a room with the necessary fire ratings around it to meet code requirements, HVAC requirements for ventilation. Our pH neutralization system for the lab waste. We have a building centralized pH neutralization system. So all of these lab floors above the first floor have lab waste taps ready for tie-in that go down to this building central pH system. Any lab waste gets treated in this system that's permitted through MWRA. So we'll have to have an MWRA lab waste discharge permit, which we would seek from them. And but that's a couple examples of what we've got designed in here for the lab tenants upstairs.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. And for the chem storage in particular, just because of some of the intricacies of multi-tenant versus single-tenant buildings, you mentioned this is core and shell, so the rooms in theory could be subdivided into other rooms, or is that?
That's exactly right. Yep, the code dictates a number of control areas per level, and those get reduced as you move higher in the building. For example, the first floor can have 4 control areas, I believe. So one of these storage rooms that's designated for chemical storage could, in theory, be subdivided into 4 caged or separate rooms, depending on a tenant's needs. Yeah.
No, that's perfect, because it sort of addresses my question, which is, is the plan here going to be viable no matter who ends up leasing out as a lab tenant? And they would do the due diligence, I'm sure, with some sort of has waste contractor to make sure that it's and then maybe last question before I yield back, which is around the Somerville Biosafety Committee. So being a lab building in Somerville, the Somerville Biosafety Committee is going to be sort of involved in the life cycle of tenants running through this. And I was just curious what your approach is for community engagement with some of these biosafety processes, especially given that they're pretty nascent at this stage. Really around community notice for, having input into the sort of permitting process around lab permits and biosafety.
This is Kevin Griffin again with Legge McCall Properties. I would just say that we, again, it's kind of tenant specific, but we would be well prepared as landlord, kind of with standards and understanding the requirements, that if there is any sort of intricacies to what they do for science, as it relates to biohazard or chemicals, that they would seek any required local permits or approvals to use said chemicals or flammables. So that's something that's built into leases, but it's hard to answer the question just given the corn-shell nature of not having tenants identified at this stage.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Still going to ask the question. So with that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Thank you, Aaron. I always appreciate when you get to ask your subject matter expertise on lab buildings, because you ask questions that I wouldn't even know to ask. But I want to say thank you for raising the biosafety committee question, because this came up a couple of weeks ago, and I think the board may know that I've been in communication with RISA about having a presentation to the board by, I think it's the gentleman who's the chairman of the biosafety committee, Colin Ziegler, and I think we're trying to get a presentation to have an idea of, who are they, what do they do, what's the scope of community involvement with their process in review, what do they look at in review, because this is somewhat new to us. And as we are getting more and more down the path of permitting lab space, I think it's important for this board and the public to know what that entails. So I think we're trying to get that presentation. We're meeting in December. I'm not sure if it's fully on the books or not, but I think that would be beneficial for everybody.
Mr. Chair, this is Emily Hutchings. I would just like to confirm that Raisa is working on that. I will follow up with her when she returns to the office, and we'll make sure that that presentation is addressed and will happen as soon as possible.
Yeah, I appreciate that. She's on vacation. Do not bother her. So Jahan, did you want to say anything before I go? Yeah, go for it.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I didn't want to break your train of thought. I just have questions. I could hold off until then.
No.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions for the applicant. The first one is in relation to the garage ramp. I understand that there's going to be vehicles coming in and leaving, especially during rush hour, peak times. I just want to better understand what has been reviewed in terms of pedestrian and bicyclist safety. I foresee a lot of traffic towards South Street, but I'd love to get more an in-depth understanding from the applicant.
This is Rola with the applicant speaking again. So in terms of bike and pedestrian routing, we don't imagine that they'd be going through Earl Street. So right now, Earl Street is serving as a sort of back of house alleyway. And that's why we've kind of mirrored back of house loading and garage ramp from 101 South. But if we look at like a master plan, and I believe that was in the thoroughfare presentation, that kind of shows circulation. And if it's not there, we can kind of flash that up the next time we present to you guys. It'll show you how we imagine transportation around the site in terms of pedestrian circulation, bike circulation, and none of those traverse Earl Street. So I think the main road for cars obviously would be South Street, and then the main road for pedestrians and bikes would be off the thoroughfare. But we don't encourage them to go through Earl Street. So hopefully that's not a big deal. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does help, but for our next meeting, if it's possible to see the flow,
Definitely, yeah.
I think that's going to really help things. And then just to echo the points that my fellow board members have raised around the potential bike storage space. If it is through the thoroughfare one, then that's one thing. But if you have bicyclists who are coming through South Street, I see that there's a green strip, a bicycle lane that's available. It's essentially forcing bicyclists who are coming through South Street to either select Earl Street or Harding Street to basically access the bike storage area. So just something for you to consider for our next meeting and next conversation.
Yeah, it is worth noting that our actual bike room can be accessed directly off of South Street. So David, if you're able to point to the entrance there, there's a vestibule off the lobby that's right next to the retail space on the south. That vestibule, you walk into those two passenger elevators, you can take your bike directly down and you will land in the bike room. So we can also show that plan to you guys the next time we meet for sure.
Right, I think that would be very helpful. And then the second question that I have, it's regarding the retail and ACE space. I just want to better understand I know the plans have changed, and I just want to better understand what the vision is for the retail ACE space for this building. I understand that future tenants and all that hasn't been identified, but based on what I'm seeing, this is just a visual. it seems like two spaces are, I think there's a smaller space, a medium-sized space, and a larger space. And I just wanted to get a better sense of what the thought process was when it comes to designing these spaces and what the applicant thinks about.
Sorry,
Right.
Roland, I don't know if you want to answer that. For some reason, my audio is not working very well, but do you want to answer that, or you want me to answer?
You can go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. No, the intention, I think, was to, maximize the edges. I think the spirit of the master plan was to take the most vital streets and line them as much as possible with the retail and the A space, as well as the lobby. So, wherever you see the blue and orange, it was really trying to activate it, and as much as possible, because of the opportunity to have that spill out, that they can also spill out onto the the terraces and the adjacent public realm space. The lobby, one of the things that we wanted to do because of the location of the Union Square, the T-stop, that a lot of pedestrian movement would be coming down Thoroughfare. And the idea that you would also have an entry at this location to be able to enter into the building as well.
Understood. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to ask questions.
Not a problem. Thank you for yours. So I don't have my fellow board members, I think, asked quite a number of very good questions that I think following our discussion, we're looking forward to a little bit more information on a couple of items when we reconvene in a few weeks. So I don't have any questions for you at this time. I just want to make a couple of comments. First, I want to echo Councilor Scott's praise for your ability to work with the neighborhood and with staff and with the planning board. It's pretty apparent that you're not one of those folks that come here and say, this is what we want, and dang you all. So it's really nice to be able to have somebody that we work with. I really like the way this building looks in the context of the Boynton Yards neighborhood. It is not, it's a big building, but it doesn't look like it feels like a big building. I think you did a great job breaking up the massing in a way that I don't think we've seen in a lab building of anywhere close to this size. So I just want to give you a lot of credit for really bringing this to a place where I think the building looks nice. I think the materials look nice and different. It's not just a glass box. I like the fact that you've got the glass step. I think it's an interesting visual. I think it definitely helps break up the fact that it's a big building. I think the step backs help quite a bit. I think the fact that even though you've got a 2-story entryway, it seems like that would really make the building work at a human scale while being a 12-story building. So I just want to say thank you for making a creation, a building that I think speaks to what we hope to see, or I hope to see, for buildings of this size. So I just wanted to say good job, and I look forward to continuing this discussion in a couple of weeks. Yes, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I have 2 other quick comments. I guess one is to sort of, well, I guess 3 comments. One is to echo basically everything you just said here about how this building looks. And you guys did a really good job on this. It does read like a super cool building. And then for the comment, this is actually coming off of some of the neighborhood meeting notes. I wanted to sort of raise the public comment for suckering vines and vegetation along the building, especially on this step. I mean, I'm thinking, like, how cool would it be to have a trailing vine hanging off maybe the upper balcony, almost like the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, right? You can sort of imagine something like that could look super cool, and positively impact green score and the view from the neighborhood. I mean, still, I think it looked like a great building, but I just wanted to bubble that one up as a cool idea. And then also, this is maybe a question for the applicant and potentially Councilor Scott. There were some comments about construction driving in the neighborhood meeting notes, and especially around some of the safety concerns with the contractors driving around. And I was just wondering if that's gotten better. I know you guys were going to talk to the contractors about that safety issue.
This is Kevin Griffin with Legg McCall Properties. And I'll just add that we did talk to the contractor. We've added signage to ensure people parking in that parking lot have slowed down. Whether fortunate or not, we've done a lot of road work since that last neighborhood meeting in the area, so people are forced to go slow because it's a little bumpy. But we feel we've tried to implement measures with the contractor and make sure we hold them to a high standard. And as far as I know, we have not received any additional complaints, and if we do, we certainly intend to address them immediately.
Thank you for the response, and I appreciate the measures.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Councilor Scott.
All right, thank you. Just to Board Member Gino's request there, I will say that several of the residents nearby there are almost exclusively Spanish speaking, and don't normally engage with the city through the customary channels. I did meet with some of those neighbors just about a month, 5 weeks ago, I'd say. And honestly, it wasn't top of mind, but before I say it hasn't been a problem, I would love to be able to go back and check with them. As the applicant says, there's been a lot of work and a lot of changes down there. So I really appreciate the question, and I will take it as a poke to me as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man to go back and check with my council. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's all I have. So thank you for the great presentation. And again, thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me speak twice.
Of course. Big project. We want to make sure everybody's got what they need to ask and say out. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to ask or say of the applicant or staff before we move along and reconvene in a couple of weeks? Okay. Seeing none, I want to thank the applicant for their presentation. We're going to leave the written comment period open until noon on Friday, November 4th, which is the Friday before our next regularly scheduled meeting. You can submit your written comments to planning@somervillema.gov. So the planning board, I do believe, has another joint hearing next week, but we will not be taking this up at that time. What I'd like to do now is move to continued discussion on these two applications to the November 10th meeting, seconded by Jahan. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
Okay. Those agenda items are continued, and I do not believe there is any other business that's before the planning board at this time. So at 8:54 p.m., the chair moves to adjourn this meeting of the planning board, seconded by Aaron. Chair votes aye.
Jahan votes aye.
Aaron votes aye.
Debbie votes aye.
The planning board is adjourned. Thank you all very much, and I'll see my colleagues next week, but I'll see the rest of you in a few.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Good night.
Good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Good night.
Thank you.